My name is Andrew Henderson, and this is the first ever episode of Nomad CapiTEAlist, where we take a deeper dive in a longer format talking about the human side of how to live the nomad capitalist lifestyle and discuss some of the issues that I think are really important in a more raw format that we don't often have time to get into. So first of all, thank you to Michael Miller and other commenters for suggesting Nomad CapiTEAlist. Today I'm enjoying a red balloon tea. Just put this down here. From our friends at TWG. It's a really nice non-caffeinated red tea with some notes of, I think, strawberry in there. Really nice tea. And what I want to talk about today is speak to some of the comments, some of the questions, talk about some anecdotes that I think hold people back from getting full boat into what we talk about here at Nomad Capitalist. Because, you know, the idea of reducing your tax rate from 50% to 5% sounds pretty good. Everyone would like to do that, right? The idea of getting to whatever the goal is, whether it's owning real estate around the world, whether it's having more money to invest, whether it's being able to retire earlier, keeping more of your own money through lower taxes, everyone pretty much likes these ideas. Even the people who say you should be paying your taxes, I've seen some of these people go from, making $20,000 a year in the radio industry to being successful. Suddenly when they become really successful, they're not so, loving the idea of giving all their money. So any of these goals sound really attractive, yet a lot of people push back on the stuff that we talk about. And I want to go through some things that have been in the news and some important comments. We got a comment from a gentleman named Tarek Essam, who tells an interesting story that I think kind of sums up what I want to discuss with you today. He said, I was 9 when I discovered the magical word of immigration. He said, I left my home country, home in quotes, the first chance I got, and moved to a country where I could make more money. Then immigrated to another country that gave me a great passport that grants me the freedom to travel where I want. Now I'm planning to get more residents and diversify even more. I really don't understand how people place their entire life under the mercy of a single country, break up from the tyranny of geography and borders. And that's a really interesting approach, because I think that what can often help people live this nomad capitalist lifestyle is taking it one step at a time. Sometimes I'll talk to folks and we'll say, all right, here's phase 1 of the plan. And then here's phase 2. And I try not to get too much into phase 3, 4, 5, because at that point it just gets a little ridiculous. Who can plan that far ahead with immigration programs and banks and everything else changing? But phase 2 is maybe you can't quite afford it yet, or you can't justify it yet, or we don't need to start this yet. And I think having phases is a potentially good way to dip your toe in, as Tarek Essam is saying. Start off by moving to a country that you enjoy, build up your income, then go and focus on a passport. Everyone's path is different, but if you compartmentalize this stuff, at times you can do it in phases. Now, for me, I always say, if you're not sure where to start with this stuff, and we talk about this in the book, by the way, Nomad Capitalist, start off just by getting a bank account somewhere else. Go to a country like Ecuador, Georgia, Armenia, somewhere where you can put $100 in a bank account and just see how you feel with that, okay? And start to get comfortable with the idea that just as in that story, you don't want to be under the mercy of one country. You put $100 or $1,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is that's comfortable for you in a bank account somewhere else. And soon you'll find yourself doing much, much, much more. For me, I've talked about how, those early days of doing what we're doing here at Nomad Capitalist, every $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 was a lot. Now we're literally, looking at multi-6-figure properties. I'm buying them sight unseen because I understand and I have the network to do that. But when you're starting, you want to perhaps do it in phases. You don't necessarily want to dive in all at once. And if you do that, as you go, you'll find yourself diving in more and more. And I think that the reason that's important is, this shock therapy is difficult for a lot of folks. I work with people all the time. Very rarely is it, I've never traveled outside the United States, but I want to get a $100,000 donation citizenship by investment, renounce my citizenship, move to some other country I've never been to. Normally it's, let me start exploring, let me go to 4 different countries, let me get the foreign earned income exclusion, let me become tax non-resident in my country, let me work towards a second passport. Now, everyone's needs are different, but very rarely does someone just dive all in. But if you don't take those baby steps, then you're going to be stuck in a situation where there was a tweet from Greg Gutfeld, who's on Fox News in the United States. We'd actually talked to his people, very nice people, about speaking at Nomad Capitalist Live. And he hosted a TV show 6 days a week, so it's kind of difficult. But Greg Gutfeld was commenting on something that was happening in the middle of all the riots that are going on in the United States. And he quotes, or he says, "Once again, where are our leaders? This is confirmation that we have no one else to rely on but ourselves. I hate to see this country die, but we can't deny our own eyes." Now, I'm not here to comment on riots. I'm not here to comment on what's happening in the United States. This is not a political show, and it's really not my place to do that. But what I like most particularly is the part in the middle where he says we have no one to rely on but ourselves. And my response to that was, you can rely on yourself in a low tax or tax-free country, no expensive government needed. This is the great myth that is going on in so many high-tax countries. And we saw this with a lot of things that happened in 2020, where you pay them a lot of money in taxes, and then you expect certain things. And when they don't feel like providing it, whether it's safety, security, health, hospital capacity, renewing your passport, whatever the case may be, they have an excuse. This is how most people go through their life, right? They have quote unquote reasons that are actually excuses for why they can't do things because they don't want to. The government's no different. And so people are starting to come to the conclusion we can only rely on ourselves. Well, why are you paying so much to rely on yourself? You can go to Dubai and rely on yourself. If you don't like the idea of Dubai, you can go to Vanuatu or St. Kitts and Nevis or any other tax-free or territorial tax or tax-exempt country, and you can go and live there. Keep more of your own money, build your nest egg, build your net worth, invest in places where you're treated best, and stop relying on just one place. And I think that's really important to understand. Where is the value coming from? And we all look for value in our lives. When you go to buy a house, you have a real estate agent. The real estate agent fights for you, at least in the Western countries where there's such a thing as a buyer's agent. Your real estate agent fights for you to not pay $1 more than you have to for that house because you don't want to overpay. When you go out to a restaurant, you look at the reviews for the restaurant. Most people, if the review is not 4.2 stars or 4.5 stars, whatever, they're not going to the restaurant. And we put a lot of effort into making sure we're getting value. You get your restaurant, people look at the restaurant bill. After they go to the restaurant that they looked at or that they reviewed, they make sure that they didn't get charged an extra $2 for the potatoes. Yet we give so little thought to places where we now have to rely on ourselves and we're not getting any value for the money. You pay and you get nothing, okay? So I think that's worth keeping in mind. We had another comment, and by the way, if you have a question or a comment here for Nomad CapiTEAlist, just leave a comment below and we will get to them in our future episodes. We want to hear from you. Here's something that a commenter made. We made a popular video, if you haven't seen it, on why I will not invest in Spain or Italy. As you know, I'm a fan of the next big thing. I'm a fan of up-and-coming places. We talk about the next Singapore, and the next thing is constantly changing because a country gets a little bit of traction, and sometimes they make things a bit more difficult, or they raise their requirements, or they start being more difficult with foreigners. So the next thing is always changing. But I talked in the video about why I don't want to invest in Spain or Italy, because for me, every country has a brand name. The place that's the next big thing is not well known. It does not have a brand name. And I was watching a Carl Icahn interview recently, and he was talking about buying companies. And he said, you have to buy companies when nobody wants them, when people are running for the hills. That's when you go in and you buy something. And then you sell it when everyone wants it. You supply and demand, right? When nobody wants it, you do them the favor of buying it from them, taking it off their hands. And then when they're all hot for whatever it is you have to sell, hey, you're in luck. I've got something to sell you for much more than I paid for it. And that's the way to create wealth, right? And so basically to me what that says is don't buy things when it's a brand name. Buy it when the brand is trashed. And so for me, Spain and Italy have brands. People like the idea of living there, but there's no value proposition there. And so my thought is, if you live in Spain or Italy and you like living in Spain or Italy and you're willing to pay what you're paying in order to continue living there, that's fine. But if you're like me, or probably you, and you're not from one of those countries, why would you move to that country when you have hundreds of options of different countries or territories to move to? Why would you pick that country, right? I can understand folks who are like myself from the United States. Even if they live overseas, they want to keep that ability to go back and visit their family and friends in a tax-friendly manner. I get it. And so I understand where you're from has some emotions. I think getting over that and potentially looking beyond that is important. But if you're living in Spain and you want to stay there, fine, that's your choice. You're getting what you're paying for. But there are plenty of other places that offer the benefits of Spain. Anyway, here's the comment that someone made in response to my saying, I'm not doing Spain and I'm not doing Italy. He said, he makes some valid points, but for someone who enjoys European culture, why go to Asia or even to Armenia? Italy is a museum country. Everywhere you look, you find art and music. Madrid is one of the greatest European cities with a great vibe, strong art scene, great transportation. I cannot put a price to be able to go to the opera or concerts if I'm living there. It just comes down to priorities. I think that last part is very important. It does come down to priorities. Now, this is where I think the importance of compartmentalization comes in. It's called Go Where You're Treated Best. And what I've talked about is the story of my own parents in the mid-1990s who looked at the idea of maybe we'd like to move to another country. They did not eventually, but they looked at a couple of countries that have now become quite popular, like New Zealand, like Chile. Back then, it was much more common to just say, we're moving everything from this country and now we're going to this country, right? From one to the other. Now you have the option. We have the ability to hold assets and to invest and to be citizens and to be residents in countries all around the world. And since the mid-90s, you've seen so many more options pop up. Countries that were not an option back then are now a very good option in many cases. And so you do not have to choose between going to the opera and living the nomad capitalist lifestyle. Now, if you are from the United States, or if you're from Australia or Canada and you choose to move to Paris, you may be going where you're treated best. Now, it's not going to be in the context that we often talk about, where you're going to be paying less tax, because you ain't paying less tax living in Paris. I can tell you that. I don't know where you'd have to come from to pay less tax living in Paris. But here's the thing. You can visit Paris. You can visit Madrid. And what I found, this is my own personal opinion, but what I found is I like to live in places that are a bit more of what I would call normal life, for lack of a better word. I live in places where maybe there's not as much bustle, places that I think offer a great value, where I like the people. You know, to me, having people that are nice, that's important. Having amenities, having a consumer culture, having the ability to get things that I need and want at shops. You know, I was walking around Paris a couple of years ago. I can't tell you how long I was looking for a bottle of water to buy. Just a shop that sold a bottle of water. I don't know where, I was walking around the wrong neighborhood. I mean, it must have been an hour and a half. I'm looking, where can I buy water? Where can I buy water? You go to Asia, you're passing a 7-Eleven or a Family Mart every 100 feet. And so it is a matter of priorities. I think that when you get to the 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure level and above, the priority of where your finances are become more important. Because you know what? In Kuala Lumpur, they have a Philharmonic. Now, it's a lot more expensive than the cheap seats that you'd buy in Europe. It may not be more expensive than some of the fine venues in a place like Paris. But, you know, compared to a lot of places in Europe, it's not cheap. You know, you go to the Dubai Opera, not cheap. They do have an opera, and so some of these countries are starting to import these things, especially countries like the UAE and Singapore and places like that, where they want to have this world presence, this international presence in their country. You can do these things. But for me, I like living these cities that I live in, and then go and visit Madrid, go and visit Paris. The compartmentalization is important, that you do not have to stay in one place for the rest of your life. You can get those things in either because there are new opportunities for culture emerging in certain places, or by visiting those places. for me, if you're making $1 million a year, paying $550,000 a year to the French government for the privilege of going to the opera, how many times a year is not worth it? Now, this is coming from a guy who, I don't pretend to be a classical music or an opera expert. I do enjoy going to the opera. In fact, this was the year I was planning to do my Opera Houses of Europe tour. Looks like that's not going to happen. But if you see me walking around with my AirPods on, chances are I'm probably listening to some kind of classical music or some kind of opera. I don't know a ton about it, but I enjoy it. But, for me, what I've determined is, life is more about money than some people who don't have money want you to think it is. It is about priorities. $500,000 a year, if you are a seven-figure earner, to have to live in Dubai and go to the Dubai Opera, or live in Kuala Lumpur or Singapore and go to the Philharmonic there, and then occasionally schlep to Europe and go and see the original. I mean, $500,000 a year. You can give an apartment looking at the Dubai Opera, a beautiful apartment in the middle of downtown Dubai looking at the Dubai Opera. Not the best apartment, it's not the Uber penthouse, but you can get a nice apartment for that $500,000. Imagine in 1 year being the difference between owning your apartment paid for with the money you saved and buying something to live in Paris. For me, yes, money is a factor, right? If money weren't a factor, then the world, it would just be totally different, right? Money is always a factor. Now, maybe I don't love the opera enough. And yes, I have constantly said 40 million people in California have decided, they've voted with their feet. That's the place for them. Some of them love living there. Some of them are very wealthy, and it's worth paying the exorbitant taxes and dealing with the ridiculous business-killing regulations in that country, or that state, rather. Some people claim they want to leave, and they don't. So I guess they've decided it's not that important. It's not that much of a priority to get out. So people do vote with their feet, and people do prioritize things. But what I'm trying to tell you is, how many people live in California because they have great beaches? They're not the best beaches. How many people, I've known some of these guys because I spent a lot of time in California in my early and mid-20s. How many guys are living in California because it has the best dating scene in the world? It's not the best dating scene in the world. It's not the best place to meet. Nowhere close, right? And so what I'm trying to tell you is, if you think that the only place to go to the opera is Paris, then that should be looked at and that should be adjusted. If you think that by living in a tax-friendly country you can't visit Paris, then we should talk about that, because that's simply not true. Now, if you just are totally on a different page than I am, and it's worth it for you, then I encourage you to do that. I am not here to scold people or tell you that if you think differently than I am, that you're wrong. What I'm here to say is, if you're a successful person, there's probably a better way. And there are many ways in this world. Again, in my lifetime, the number of places you can live that are livable and that are beautifully livable has increased dramatically. Go back to the year 1984 and look at the number of countries that you would live in, and then come to today. You weren't living in Dubai probably in 1984. You probably weren't living in Singapore in 1984. You certainly weren't living in Kuala Lumpur in 1984. I can tell you, having spent time, including substantial time in a lot of places, I like the art scene in lower tax countries in Europe, lower cost countries in Europe. I think there's other parts of culture that's not just opera in parts of Asia. There's very interesting culture all over the world, and what I've decided is I'm going to spend my time in different places. I'm going to own homes in different countries, and I'm going to travel between them, and I'm going to get the best of each. Because for me, even if I'm the world's #1 opera fan, I don't want opera 365 days a year. They say, if you eat foie gras every day, eventually it just becomes like, please get it away from me. I don't want the foie gras anymore. I don't want the filet mignon anymore. If you eat it every day, it loses its appeal. And so my trifecta approach of having homes in potentially 3 places or 4 places, one gentleman we worked with wanted 6 places, having the ability with residence permits and citizenships to travel between those, to me, that's valuable because you get a little bit of taste of everything. I was in Latin America for about 3 months last year. Hadn't been there for that long in quite a while. And I enjoyed it. I come from the United States. You know what? once or twice I enjoyed going into the convenience store and getting a disgusting convenience store hot dog. That's what people, that's like, it reminds me of being 19 years old and producing radio shows. And going in at night while I was running my business during the day. And I would, you'd go in before, producing shows, and you get one of these disgusting hot dogs. And so it's like a taste of home. You can't get that in Asia. You can't get that in Europe. Obviously there's many more cultural elements in Latin America, and there's many more things about it than bad hot dogs. But it was nice to go and see that. And I enjoyed the warmth, and I enjoyed the culture, and the beautiful colors, and all those things that are very distinct to Mexico, Colombia, that part of the world. Got to see Chile, got a bit of more developed part of the world in there. But after a while, I want to go and I want to be in Asia. After a while, I want to go and be in Eastern Europe. I love Tbilisi, love Belgrade. I want to be in the seaside eventually. So I think we all have these different desires of what we're going to do. You can live in one country and you can pay a boatload in taxes, and you can deal with whatever they throw at you your entire life. And you can still go and take your beach vacation in the summer, or you can live the nomad capitalist life, and you get your opera, you get your beach vacation, you get all the things that you want to do, but you do it in a much more friendly manner to your finances, to your freedom. And I'm always reminded of what one of our team members said a number of years ago, because I was asking him, you think I should move to Hong Kong from Kuala Lumpur? Kuala Lumpur has been kind of my favorite base in Asia for many years. I said, I do like Hong Kong also. He says, what are you going to do in Hong Kong? He says, you're going to basically do the same routine every day. You're going to go out and get a beverage. You're going to go to the mall, or you're going to go into the bookstore, or you're going to go to the cafe and work, or you're going to sit at home and work, or whatever. Very little, he said, is going to change. And yeah, maybe you'll go to whatever the equivalent of the opera is. Or, okay, now you're closer to Macau. Maybe you'll go to Macau more often on the ferry, and you'll do gambling weekends at the Wynn, right? But all those things can be done really from anywhere. Being in Kuala Lumpur, I'm not really any worse off than I would be in Hong Kong, but it costs me a heck of a lot less to live. Just talk to a guy that we're working with, pays $15,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. I've seen that one-bedroom apartment before. It's beautiful. It's spectacular, one-bedroom apartment. But 18 months of rent at that place, you could buy an equivalent place in Kuala Lumpur, and you own it, and you're done. And what's really going to be that much different? What is substantially different? If you're not working at a job in an office in Hong Kong, why do you need to be there? You're not living at the opera house every day. And so for me, for folks who are at that level, it is important. This is what I'm always trying to get you to do here, is realize that you do have to rely on yourself, as Greg Gutfeld said. You've got to be accountable for you. That's the best way to build wealth. It's the best way to be free. It's the best way, I think, to be happy. And take stock, once you're doing that, of where you can go, where you're treated best, and realize that all these false restrictions that people are putting on you, all these things when people are propping up one country or the other, it is about priorities. And at a certain point, you want to make sure you're getting value in your life. I can promise you, coming from the United States, apparently the best country in the world, I can promise you, I feel better now than I did when living there. I've given up very few conveniences, and I've added some that I didn't have here. I've added freedoms, and I've added a lot more wealth. So you've got to determine your own priorities. That's where I'm coming from. Welcome to our first episode of Nomad CapiTEAlist. We want to hear your comments, your questions. What do you want us to talk about? Leave a comment below, and we're looking forward to more episodes of Nomad CapiTEAlist. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.